Welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is July 8, 2023, and we're streaming live on Twitch, twitch.tv/socialism-S4A. I'm joined currently by 26 viewers in the chat. And we're doing a live stream today. I don't usually do Saturdays, but there are some specific reasons for this stream. Basically, I am still on the reduced streaming mode where we only do once or twice a month instead of like once or twice a week. This leaves me a lot more time to do audiobooks and, saves me just, anyway, as I mentioned in the last office hours stream, the streams just kind of would take over my week when I would stream that much and would leave little time for, anything else related to the S4A time budget and all that kind of thing. So, we're going to do some streaming today because the next audiobook that I'm working on is Anti-Deering Part 2 by Engels, which is the third to last video in the basic Marxism-Leninism study guide video playlist. However, it is pretty long, probably the last Anti-Deering thing was like 6 hours. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to post anything really soon, and if I do, it's probably going to be some short pieces while I'm recording Anti-Deering. So you may not see anything posted, and I figured, well, it's been 2 weeks, let's do a stream, and that'll be some content. But we're only going to do 2 hours in the stream today, just trying to, cap it somewhere. So we'll go, I guess we had a little bit of technical issues, so we'll go about an hour and 50 minutes from now. All right. So without further ado, actually, you know what? Without further ado, let's thank the patrons. Get that out of the way. I oftentimes do that way at the end, and I wanted to do it in the beginning. Patreon.com/socialism-for-all. You can get your name on the screen like these fine folks. I would make content even if nobody supported, but I definitely wouldn't be able to put as much time into it as I actually do. So this is hugely appreciated. Really, my deepest thanks to the patrons. It really helps. So again, patreon.com/socialism-for-all. We don't run ads on the channel or sponsorships or anything like that. So, the patronage is really important, and again, lets me spend much more time on this than I'd be able to do otherwise. Beyond that, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff helps the channel, helps YouTube to recommend the channel. All right, so all of that said, let's get back to the main screen here. There we go. Turn up the mic just slightly. Okay, so what's been said in the chat so far today? People are just waking up. Yeah, it depends on what time zone you're in, but could be that, Saturday morning. Yeah. What else? Some people here for the first time. Welcome everybody to the live stream. And celebration of a new hire. Good job on getting the new job there. Hope it works out. As they say, the only thing worse than having a job is looking for one. So, listen to a vintage recording of John Lennon talking about socialism. John Lennon of the Beatles, of course. It was just as bad as you would expect. Those rockers didn't know squat. Beatles were libs, apparently. Yeah, I guess being, multimillionaires can kind of do that. It's like we've talked about Stephen King before, who tends to be fairly left-leaning and always has in his, he's not a right-winger by any means. His son, who's also an author, uses the pen name Joe Hill after the famous IWW labor organizer. Definitely left-leaning, uses a lot of social justice and labor themes in his books, but he's the best-selling author of all time and like a gazillionaire. So, I think all things considered, the politics are okay. As far as the Beatles, yeah, there was definite explicit anti-communism in the music, like the song Revolution. That's the one where it's like when you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, nobody's going to like you, is basically what the lyric says. And yeah, some of these are statements on things inside the relatively privileged UK working class movement at the time. But again, very, very out of touch, being the biggest pop stars on earth. And, John and Yoko definitely publicized anti-war messaging, but it was in a very lib individualistic context for sure. It wasn't, proletarian sort of mass oriented so much. And that is unfortunate. So, yeah, Beatles, not exactly, whatever their strengths were, being pro-communist is not exactly one of them. What else do we have here? People talking about trying to read theory but having ADHD and having trouble focusing. Doing the audiobooks for me is really helpful too, because I make sure then that I read every word, because it's, being put into a recording and then shared with other people, and they're probably going to ask questions about it. And so I have to really pay attention. So, doing the channel, it's as much about my doing the reading as anything else. You're hearing my studies there and the notes that I make. One of the best ways to learn something is to teach it. So, somebody was saying that the notes that I added to value, price, and profit were probably the most helpful of any of the notes that they had heard. And in that one in particular, that audiobook is like a condensation of Karl Marx's Capital down to like a 2-hour speech. So really important topics, and I wanted to make sure that even if people were going to only spend 2 hours, 45 minutes listening to that file, that they could come away from it understanding, what is the source of profit, prices versus value, and all the other things that are in there. So, yeah. It helps me. That's another reason why I wanted to, I think the streams have been good for getting out there, sharing my sort of thought process and engaging in this back and forth with people, and letting people in on, again, just the reasoning behind what we're doing here, the text selection, why we're taking certain positions on different issues, or, why I interpret things certain ways. It's been a great opportunity to explain all of that and engage in dialogue about it. But, getting back to the texts, for me, that's the more uplifting part of the channel. And, there's still a lot of relatively basic stuff that we haven't covered yet. Excuse me. I've been up for a while today, but I haven't really been using my voice that much yet so far today. So we're just warming up. What was I saying? Yeah, there's still a lot of stuff that we haven't covered yet. Origin of the family, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. There's a lot. There's a lot of stuff we're going to be covering that is fairly major that we just haven't gotten to yet. And it's been over 3 years. That's how much there is to, get immersed in. I felt like it was, somewhere after the 2-year mark that I kind of started knowing what I was talking about more. And after the 3-year mark, it got even better. I figure after the 5-year mark, I'll probably be pretty knowledgeable. At least we'll have covered a lot of primary texts by that point. And then maybe, for the next 5 years, we can do more history. You know what I mean? Like, there's a difference between primary sources, like reading something from Lenin, and then reading something from a historian that is using a different process and is incorporating multiple sources into an overall historical account. So we're doing a lot of primary texts and theory at this stage, by which I mean like the first several years of the channel, and probably get more into history after that. But, we're trying to hold the line for people knowing what the fuck they're talking about when it comes to what is communism, what is Marxism, what is socialism, and trying to really raise the bar on the average English-speaking leftist, knowing what they're talking about, because there's a real plague of ignorance, and want to contribute to being part of the solution to that. I know it's definitely helped me, and I'm glad it's helping other people. So yeah, I'm going on a long solo Novid road trip in a month, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to get the audiobooks offline for the driving. They do help a lot. I mean, there's a number of ways you can get YouTube videos, but make a free SoundCloud account, and they're all available through the download button on SoundCloud. That is probably the single easiest way. I gotta take a sip here. That's probably the single easiest way is SoundCloud. You have to make a free account, but then you can just click the download button and get the audiobooks and whatever else is up there. How many files do we have on the SoundCloud? It's probably almost 500 at this point. You know you're a good communist when the mic fights you, like Michael Parenti. Yep. So yeah, we had an issue with mic choppiness. That was also the case at the end of the last stream in like the last 10 minutes of it. I don't know what was causing that, but it seems like we've got it now. Yeah, you don't need SoundCloud Premium or anything like that. Is William Z. Foster a good Marxist theorist to study or not? Yeah, I would say so. We have Organizing Methods in the Steel Industry up on the channel. I have a few other texts from Foster picked out for future reading. He wrote some texts against revisionism in the 40s, and so he was kind of the opposition to Browderism in CPUSA in the 30s and 40s. And some would say the loyal opposition, like he nominally objected but didn't really maybe fight as hard as he could have. But in any case, yeah, he sort of represented, to at least some extent, the anti-Browderist current within CPUSA. What I've read so far is good, and I think his reputation is generally good. But, I mean, give it a read. Let us know what you think. I learned the other week that the song Zombie by the Cranberries is like anti-Irish republicanism. I think I read that too. I've never really gotten deeply into that. But, yeah, I never really liked that song personally. Just the idea of like, and again, I never really got in and deeply analyzed the lyrics just because, again, I mean, I remember when that song first came out and it was played constantly. But just the idea that, like, oh, this conflict is all in your head, it just seemed so kind of absurdly reductionist in the first place. Like, no, I think that's a misrepresentation, actually. And, I just never got into it beyond that point. But I think I saw somebody writing about that, too, recently. The Beatles were about as pro-communist as Cornel West. Yeah, the other thing with the Beatles was, like, I think people weren't allowed to listen to the Beatles in like Eastern Europe and stuff like that. So that's probably another more sort of vanity-based reason why they didn't, express fondness for those countries. You are not on Spotify? Yes, we are on Spotify. Not everything is on Spotify. Not everything's moved over yet, but yeah, we're on Spotify. Okay. So yeah, apparently Marxist Paul had a video on that song. All right, well, so we're sort of caught up with the chat for now, while the chat comes up with other things to say, because this is really office hours, so we're going to review what has been posted on the channel since the last stream and answer any other questions or questions about what's been posted. But yeah, so what's been posted since the last stream? Ludwig Feuerbach and the end of classical German philosophy, there we go. See, that's the kind of thing you don't hear in the audiobooks, because sometimes I'll just misread a line, or that's not really misreading, that's like misspeaking, just like a mouth fail. Like obviously the word's not philosophy, but it just comes out that way. So anyway, the magic of live streaming. Anyway, Feuerbach and the end of classical German philosophy from 1886 by Engels. That's a relatively quick for a major work. It's 1 minute 59 seconds. That's on the Basic Marxism-Leninism Study Guide playlist, and so far is criminally underviewed. It's only got 680 views. Normally the videos are getting, somewhere between like 1,000 and 1,500. So that one at less than 700 is under average. But that's a major text. I would highly recommend people go back and listen to Ludwig Feuerbach and The End of Classical German Philosophy by Engels. Again, if you're going through the basic Marxism-Leninism playlist, it's on there. The companion piece right after it is Marx's Theses on Feuerbach from 1845. Now, there is an older piece. It was one of the first things we put up on the channel, and it's one of the first videos in the basic ML Study Guide playlist, which is the German ideology, which is, again, early, like Theses on Feuerbach, from the 1840s. And basically in the German ideology, we just have one chapter, which is a very lengthy chapter. It is the chapter on Feuerbach. So Feuerbach was a philosopher post-Hegel, and so that's what this really gets into. The German ideology, the chapter on Feuerbach, there's other chapters on like Stirner and others who were kind of big at the time. Marx was starting to assemble his criticisms of those philosophers. So if you do the German ideology, which you should because it's earlier in the playlist, then come down to Ludwig Feuerbach and The End of Classical German Philosophy and Theses on Feuerbach, you can get some other thoughts from Marx and Engels about it. And Engels, as he mentions in the introduction, that's like 40 plus years later. So, 1886 was near the end of the whole Marx and Engels thing. So you've got 40 years of experience and, analysis and just general maturation of thought. And so Engels revisits Feuerbach with the help of some of Marx's old notes found in a notebook. And they basically go through and look at dialectics under Hegel, having an idealist character. Although, as Engels describes it, dialectics, as Hegel developed it, really was like, it basically, just trying to say this in a way that's not misleading, it basically was materialist, but then he just sort of inverted it because materialism was frowned upon at the time. So what Marx and Engels did was they just took Hegel's dialectics and just sort of turned it right side up again and got dialectical materialism. And so he goes into, in that text, how Feuerbach himself says, starting from the back and working backwards, or starting from the end and working backwards, I am a materialist, but if I start from the front and go forwards, I am not. And the reason for that was there was this just big stigma around materialism in philosophy at that time. But if you really break down his conclusions, it leads you right up to the door and maybe, inside the front hall of materialism. Marx and Engels picked it up from there, with a revolutionary zeal to just not be held back by sort of prejudices against materialism. And of course, science had made advances by the end of the 19th century as well. Science, of course, just heavily influencing materialism as a philosophy, the scientific method, all that kind of stuff of like, well, we can actually do incredible things using science, and let's let this influence our philosophy and just sort of thoughts about the nature of the universe. And anyway, I highly recommend it. I tend to, as I've mentioned before, dislike philosophy per se. You get into Marx and Engels and Lenin and everything. There's sort of the economics side. There's the philosophy side. There's the sociology side. There's these different sort of faces of the work. For me, the philosophy side is maybe the most dull. But this was actually pretty good. So as somebody who doesn't really like philosophy per se, I found this pretty engaging. And again, Engels wrote it near the end of his life. And I think it did benefit from all that perspective. So highly recommend those two. Theses on Feuerbach, I think, is fairly skippable. Then again, at 12 minutes, what's it really going to cost you to listen to it? And that the sort of the standout piece there is, if you're familiar with the quote from Marx, philosophers have always sought to interpret the world, but the point is to change it. That's from, I think it's thesis 11, the last thesis in there. The rest is just kind of notes that Marx had made while reading different things from Feuerbach, and sort of came up with these 11 major points that he thought were key about understanding Feuerbach's work. What else do we have? We had the bad day for fake MAGA communists as Trump denounces, quote, communists and Marxists. We're going to ban all communists and all Marxists, he added. That was a little bit of a spoof video because the whole, quote, MAGA communism thing, I mean, it's a meme, it's a grift, it's LaRouche neo-fascist weirdness. You can't even do a straight reply to it, so I did a little bit of humor and comedy in that video. It's just, you know what I mean? It's just so like off the walls absurd. But then the next video, Tasks of Revolutionary Army Contingents from 1905 by Lenin. I thought this was a really interesting text. The video is 22 and a half minutes. The first half is this audiobook, Tasks of Revolutionary Army Contingents by Lenin. And what's significant about 1905, it was the first year of the First Russian Revolution. That period lasted roughly 1905 to 1907. Then there was a period of counter-revolution, conservatism, you know, the empire strikes back. And then World War II, starting in 1914, marked a turning of the tide. And then, of course, in 1917, the Tsar was deposed. And then there was a socialist revolution late in the year, 1917. But so this was Lenin talking about what should the Revolutionary Army contingents be doing. And it's very interesting. You rarely hear Lenin being this direct. But, you know, if you want vignettes of what was going on as far as the street fighting and other things that were actually going on and playing out at that time, Lenin was sort of describing them there. And then in the second half of the video, this fed into, and basically that reading was inspired by Xiang Yu, who, if you don't know who Xiang Yu is, great. Let's hope it stays that way for those who do. He's sort of in the Caleb Maupin, Pat Sock, LaRouche, neo-fascist world, and was basically saying that if, quote, Twitter, oh no, it wasn't even him, it was Midwestern Marx. This came off, he was defending Xiang Yu, that's what it was. Xiang Yu was making transphobic comments and actively promoting fear and, you know, spreading hateful messages about trans people. And then Midwestern Marx stepped up to defend Xiang Yu there. And this is really simple. You can either stand with your trans comrades or you can stand with reactionary transphobes. It doesn't really, you know, there was a commenter that was like, this requires a lot of mulling over. And I was like, not really, you know, not really. Fairly straightforward. You can stand with your comrades, some of whom are trans, or you can stand with reactionary bigots. That's not really a question, you know? Anyway, so we broke that down, but in the course of trying to defend Xiang Yu, Midwestern Marx put out a tweet that said something to the effect of, if Western Twitter leftists or communists, whatever he said, were, I was like, okay, so like you then, because you're literally a streamer, you post videos of yourself like every day. Anyway, it's just like odd how people try to like point the finger and rise above that when, no, I mean, this is a shared situation. Anyway, if they saw the Bolsheviks back in the day reaching out to the Black Hundreds, extreme monarchist, reactionary, basically proto-fascist militias, they would try to cancel them. Ha ha ha. Well, actually, what were Lenin's thoughts on the Black Hundreds? You can hear in Tasks of Revolutionary Army Contingents what Lenin thought the Black Hundreds were good for, and, you know, basically target practice was what he thought. So, poor tweet, read a book, and yeah, we got to break that down in that video. Following that very important video, Value, Price, and Profit by Marx. Again, if you want a condensed version of Capital, there it is. This was from 1865. Marx was working on Capital, and he got called to the First International to basically take part in a debate against another person, Weston, who was talking about the causes of inflation and that trade unions shouldn't argue for raises and things like that. And Marx shut the whole thing down, basically using notes from the book that he was working on, Capital. Highly recommend. I might even make that video one of the pinned videos along with the State and Revolution. It's really something that more people should see. And then I just finally posted the stream from 2 weeks ago, the last office hours stream. We talked a lot about Cornel West and the Green Party in that video, as well as pseudo-anti-imperialism. See a lot of that these days. What else have we been doing on the channel? By the way, speaking of, I just saw this the other day and I wanted to, speaking of the sort of Midwest Marx fan base that, we were mentioning the PATSOK sort of neo-fascist thing. You have the lineage of sort of like it's Caleb Maupin, then Infracell took over, then Jackson Hinkle tried to pick up the banner. All of them have since been discredited. Seems like Midwest Marx is trying to step into that role at this point, but to have it both ways, to do all the PATSOK things, but then try to claim absolutely no connection. But then, you look at the fan base too, and this came out of, where did I find this? This came out of the comments too. Somebody was, criticizing Midwestern Marx. Then somebody else stepped up with this. So yeah, this is things that fascists post, So if these are the kinds of people you're attracting, then you're doing it wrong unless you're going for fascism. So that's just that's a fascist image right there. If that's confusing to you, I'm sorry, but maybe give up for now, then start over later, because you're not getting it if that's confusing. Anyway, what else was up on the community tab? Streaming today. Yeah, there was a thing. I think I got an image of this as well. In France, there have been massive protests following, they're sort of having a George Floyd-like moment. So there was a 17-year-old Arab boy, Nahel M., and he was wantonly murdered by cops. The cops were in no danger. I think it was a traffic stop. They shot him and killed him. And then massive civil unrest following this. So this is the leader of the PCF, Communist Party of France, Fabien Roussel, and he says, what it says in the top part of the quote there, and the French use those double arrows instead of quote marks, is I prefer a state of emergency on the social media networks rather than on the populations. And so he was proposing to cut social media access when things were heating up in the country. So yeah, that's as everyone in the comments was adding, this is not what we want out of our communist leaders. How does social change of the type that communists are looking for happen? Well, you get spontaneous uprisings from the masses, and this needs to be advised and guided into the most productive and sustained forms, not shut down by literally advising the capitalist government to cut the social media so that protesters can't communicate with each other. So if you watch the video clip, and I linked to it, he basically explains that, he's actually promoting the idea that people wouldn't be protesting. They're getting the idea of protesting from seeing it on social media. So if we just cut the social media, then everybody will just sit back down and not... You're in the Communist Party? You're the National Secretary of the Communist Party? What is this? Anyway, there was a little bit of Twitter news as well, more than mere drama. Actually, since Meta... I'll put the thing up on the screen. Where is it? We got one here. There we go. So yeah, this was last weekend. Basically, Elon Musk didn't pay the Google Cloud hosting bill for Twitter, literally. And all through June, there were stories about this, like Willy won't he pay the web hosting bill. And then on July 1st, I think it was 9 a.m., the site didn't entirely go down, but people kept getting this message, rate limit exceeded. So then they came out with this thing, Musk did, at Twitter, telling people, oh, you can only view 600 tweets a day. And they still have Twitter on a basis where if you don't have an account and you're logged in, you can't see Twitter. Crazy stuff. But yeah, because they were, I guess, exceeding the web hosting they had paid for, they were limiting what people could access on the site. And this drove people over to Mastodon and Blue Sky in another mass exodus. Actually, Blue Sky was, they had to restrict new signups for the day because their site, which is still in beta, was shutting down. So many people were coming over and using the site because they wanted to post, and Twitter wasn't letting them post, or actually I think it was letting them post, but it wouldn't let them read anything. They're like, hey, I feel like interacting with people, and Twitter's not letting me do it. So they lost a lot of users that day. And then, of course, Meta, the Facebook company, just set up, they just like 2 days ago, I think, launched Threads, which is their Twitter competitor. Before anybody asks, no, I will not be going over to Threads. I don't have accounts on anything Meta, that's Instagram, Facebook. I don't recommend it. They're particularly awful, I think. And, you know, I can do just fine without it. S4A started out as a Facebook page. I didn't like it. It's so right-wing, and it's so boomer, and literally I just don't miss it even slightly. So, yeah. And then, I mean, I use Twitter for now. I think that Musk is going to run it into the ground really fast. Like, already a lot of the, I think, smarter, more advanced users have already been moving off the platform. Now we're 6 months in, and there's another mass exodus. I think this is just going to keep happening every, 3 to 6 months until 2 or 3 years from now. It'll probably be on the ropes. That would be my guess, the way that things are going now. But, I mean, people want to communicate. Some people really, live on Twitter and spend, every day, all day, every day on it. That's not good. But, I mean, there's a lot of things that I saw through Twitter that if I had not been on Twitter that I thought were really interesting. And, I mean, I guess the same goes to a certain extent for Facebook. I think Twitter does it all better. It may not, though, with Musk running it into the ground. But I'm starting to browse on Blue Sky and starting to browse on Mastodon as more of my casual browsing habit. For now, Twitter still has all the users. But, again, I think that probably as time goes on, that's going to be less and less the case. And I think it's very clear that an alternative is needed. Is it going to be Threads? Definitely not for me. And Threads has even announced they're not trying to replace Twitter. They're trying to appeal to people to whom Twitter was never that appealing. So I don't know, whatever they're doing. But if Meta's involved, I'm not particularly interested myself. What else is new in the last 2 weeks? U.S. Supreme Court struck down the student debt forgiveness. Also struck down affirmative action in college admissions, not hiring. So there's that. Another story that is more specific to the communist world is, so there's a group called the American Council of Bolsheviks. This is a group that's split off of PCUSA. So everybody knows CPUSA is the Communist Party of the USA. Lots of criticisms for basically being, a caucus of the Democratic Party or something like that. And anyway, a lot of problems with opportunism and revisionism within CPUSA. I'm far from the first person to notice those. But anyway, PCUSA split off from CPUSA, Party of Communist USA, split off from them in 2014. With an effort at, having a non-revisionist version, I guess, of CPUSA. They quickly went PATSOK, though. I mean, it was not real good. I started doing this channel in 2019, 2020, and I was not really impressed with PCUSA even at that time. And they're very small anyway. There's a little over 100 members from what I've been told. Anyway, people who were in PCUSA and were like, this party sucks, started a new thing, the American Council of Bolsheviks, which is, of course, very small. I think it's a dozen, maybe 24 people now. But they broke away, and PCUSA is suing them. They're trying to take them for almost $500,000. So they had this legal defense fund. Actually, since I posted that, I've seen that they've gotten a number of contributions for their legal defense fund, but literally PCUSA is trying to take them to court, federal court, and they're claiming that they caused $400,000 in damages, and just, it's really wild. When these are your communists, I mean, honestly, I think if that's the way that things were going, and I've heard stories about PCUSA. For example, there's another channel, Danky Kang, and Danky used to be in PCUSA, and then their channel disappeared for like a year, and then they came back, and they were like, PCUSA like throttled my channel. They were trying to turn it into, official party media, but then it was like they wound up not posting anything because just the internal process was so fucked. And anyway, if that's how dysfunctional it is, then I guess no great surprise that people, peeled off from that group. What else has been going on? And I think we're near the end of the highlights of the last 2 weeks here. Although I haven't even looked at the other thing. Which way U.S. left is a thing that I posted. We discussed that at great length in the last stream that I put up. So what else is going on? Israel, another major push to possibly level a village. And the irony here, actually it'll probably take me too long to put that on the screen. But the irony here about Israeli settlers having these big protests for democracy, meanwhile, what they're doing anyway, it writes itself, the rest of what I'm saying. What else? The Young Turfs, Cenk and Anna, back in the news for being transphobic. Cenk posting through it. Never a good idea. Anyway, we'll leave it there for now. If other people have specific current events they want to bring up, then they can do so in the chat. So let's go back into the chat and do some chatting, which I guess is what we're here for. All right. Now, where were we? Would I consider doing an audiobook for the history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union Bolshevik short course? I think that the Finnish Bolshevik already did that, and it's really long. So that would be very low priority from me. Fascism is creepy. Yeah, that buff arms ripping up the trans flag. I mean, it's just sort of like it doesn't take a genius to interpret that picture as like it's a sort of effigy or like surrogate for violence against trans people. It's disgusting. PCMF in France put out a much more principled statement than PCF. What is PCMF? I'm gonna look that up. France. Is that Maoist or what's the M stand for? And of course it's not coming up in a search. Let's add party. All right, and I'm just getting the regular French Communist Party. All right, so tell me in the chat, what is PCMF? Doesn't seem to have a strong web presence, at least by the search engine I'm using. Another comment, before I left PCUSA, I had a real row with the General Secretary over the phone. So is that the Angelo D'Angelo guy? There are a lot of stories about that guy. And I've never been in PCUSA, I've never dealt with him. A lot of stories that there's a lot of extreme control freak stuff going on in there. The national chair was embezzling money, he admitted in a letter that was leaked. Again, having this go on in an organization with like 100 members, not a great look. I was crushed to say the least and angry. Yeah, that's like, people for a long time have been like, oh, what party should I join? Make some recommendations, endorse an organization. No, and this is why. Being in a bad party can be a really crushing experience. And I'd rather people just sort of, figure it out and then if somebody really wants to join something, let us know, report back. Was it a good experience? Was it a bad experience? I think we need probably a big reshuffling of the left and a rebuilding. So, yeah, as I mentioned on the About tab on the YouTube, Politsturm is an international group that both puts out media. They have a website. They have YouTube in both English, and then there's a much bigger Russian channel as well. I see quality work coming out of there. I respect the people I know who work with them, and I haven't heard any problems yet. So that's, if people are looking for something Marxist, I'd probably point them towards that. But it's up to you, and understand that, being in a party or organization of any kind, you're gonna put a lot of yourself in it. Just make sure that you know what you're getting into and that you're really ready to do that. It's not just a social club, and it's not just it's going to affect you if things go badly. So just understand that, and go in, ready to conduct yourself in a reasonably professional way, and to be respectful of other people. And if things go badly, don't get hurt, get out of there. So I've heard some absolute horror stories from a variety of organizations. So, speaking of transphobia, I wonder if the state law that was passed in Florida that requires students to register that they're transgender will be discussed today. It wasn't planning on it, but again, this is an office hours stream, so we review what has been posted. I'm not clipping articles anymore. It just takes over everything else when I start trying to do that. But discuss it. Go ahead, bring it up. I saw Status Coup post something about it the other day. Yeah, I was mentioning Status Coup because I linked to Status Coup on the channels tab on the YouTube. Though they're not Marxist, Jordan Chariton said he considers himself a socialist, not a social democrat. It's not like a Marxist or Marxist-Leninist channel. I did see, though, they recently did a crossover with Mike Preissner, so who knows. In any case, I respect their independent journalism. They actually send reporters out to do interviews nobody else is doing. They covered the Flint water crisis. They are still covering the Ohio bomb train chemical explosion. So, I respect their work, and I think that they're doing good stuff over there. So, they were discussing it. I don't know that. Was there something in particular you wanted to say about that? And I'm always looking for good communist news sites. Actually, speaking of, there's a website, I think it's just communistnews.net or something like that. And it's an aggregator, and they advertise at the top of their website that they're aggregating content from, like 106 websites or something like that. And while that is technically true, they have 106 RSS feeds or whatever going into their site. Some of them haven't been updated in 3 years, and then a lot of them are super shitty, right-wing pseudo-anti-imperialist stuff. And I'm not nitpicking there. It's like really awful quality, like anti-vax sources and stuff like that. Nothing really communist about it. I at first got really excited, and I thought, oh, this could be a good source for finding stories to share on the community tab and stuff like that. It wasn't really that useful. So Red Herald is the one that had the PCMF statement. And yes, the M does stand for Maoist. It's the Maoist Communist Party of France. So I get my most explicitly communist news from redherald.org and from redspark.nu. Is Red Spark, actually, that's the ACB, isn't it, that we were just talking about? Oh, it's New Spark. That's what it is. Official newspaper of the American Council of Bolsheviks. Of course, Lenin's first newspaper was Iskra, the Spark, so the New Spark, I guess. That is newspark.news. What was it? So this is PCUSA's Right Opportunism Regarding the Current Inter-Imperialist Conflict by Francis Acadian and W.R. Hutherzoll. It's no secret to any reader of PCUSA's central organ, the Daily Worker USA, that the Party of Communists USA, or PCUSA, is a supporter of the Russian Federation, People's Republic of China, and the various BRICS nations in what they view as a conflict between these countries and the, quote, unipolarity of the USA. Essentially, any country, whether they are capitalist and or imperialist, is worth supporting, according to them, as long as they are not in the same imperialist camp of the US and its allies, mainly the EU and other satellite states like Japan, South Korea, and recently Ukraine. This is knee-jerk, quote, anti-imperialism, or what we could call pseudo-anti-imperialism. A mode of thought restricted to idealistic, ignorant, and infantile left-of-center liberals, in their eyes, quote, communists who want to support whichever group is currently the most geopolitically antagonistic to the United States and who view such a policy as, quote, good in and of itself. While this thought isn't exclusive or unique to the PCUSA, their swing into this camp is rather jarring when juxtaposed to their on-paper ideology and is worth investigating. So yeah, it's a basic proposition of communism that we do not support support. We don't cheer on the, quote, lesser evil in inter-imperialist conflicts. The position of communists in inter-imperialist conflict is revolutionary defeatism, not picking one of those two bourgeois sides. So yeah, I mean, and there's been, people are asking me. I made a comment to somebody that said I joined PSL because of listening to your channel. I was like, okay, PSL is one of the larger organizations. I said, just watch out for their opportunism on China and Russia. And it's basically this exact same thing. And there's a bunch of people asking, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And we talked about this a lot back in like March, around the 1 year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They do, a lot of the campus stuff, or what we would call now Three Worlds Theory. If you're confused on that, go back to the Hoxha audiobook that we recently posted, Theory and Practice of the Revolution from 1977, posted 2 weeks ago, where basically the Three Worlds Theory that was embraced a couple years after the death of Mao Zedong in People's Republic of China under Deng Xiaoping. It's this, theory it kind of lays the basis of what we've been calling Campism, but it really is more properly described as like Dengist Three Worlds Theory. So yeah, I mean, there's so many people out there doing this. I'm really sick of talking about it. That said, I mean, it's not that I'm unwilling to talk about it. We've talked about it a lot so far on the channel. Yeah, you get really sick of seeing it. So I don't know. I mean, the other noteworthy thing, of course, being that the U.S. just yesterday agreed to send cluster bombs to Ukraine, which, along with the depleted uranium weapons that they sent, these are major hazards for, the population of Ukraine itself. You're using these weapons on your own territory. I mean, first of all, most countries, or like over 100 countries, have banned the use of cluster munitions because they can remain unexploded. Russia has been using them already, allegedly, in Ukraine. And then the U.S. is like justifying their sending of cluster munitions to Ukraine with like, well, Russia's already doing it, and ours have a lower dud rate. Ours have a lower unexploded rate. The unexploded ones is what you have to worry about, because then, kids or whoever, some non-combatant stumbles upon this thing later and it explodes and kills or maims them. This is the case like with Laos, most bombed country in history, that's still riddled with unexploded ordnance. And there's just, sections of the country that are just basically minefields, like giant minefields. So the U.S. sending this, using those munitions, and they're like, well, they have a lower dud rate of like 2.75%. Okay, great. So for sure that like out of every 100 of these things that you use, like 3 of them will likely remain unexploded and then just be a hazard for people in the future to stumble across and maybe get blown up by. Same thing with the depleted uranium, is like you're using that. I mean, that shouldn't be used anywhere, but you're using it on your own territory. You're literally killing yourself. You're poisoning your own country. So, does the U.S. really care? And the U.S. PR people were like, oh, we're really hesitant and reluctant to send this. No, give me a break. The U.S. is just like, this is what they do. They just export death. So, anyway. All right, I see some more action in the chat now. So, what do we got here? Chicago just had to move busloads of migrants from the temporary holding in police stations due to sexual abuse allegations. Yeah, I saw that story. Basically, gangs of police accused of, and I think credibly likely, this likely happened in my view. Police gangs were allegedly raping and impregnating minor immigrant females, and so you got a situation, cops raping migrant teenagers and doing what cops do. So and they had to move the migrants out of there as a result of that. So another day in the USA. Red Spark, I believe, is connected with Foreign Languages Press, but I could be wrong. Let me look. I've got it open. Not seeing an About tab. So I don't know who runs it, because I don't see anything. There's a place to subscribe to their email. Anyway, foreignlanguages.press, whether they're related to this website or not, a good place to find some pretty high quality free editions of PDFs. They do some in-house audiobooks as well. They also sell inexpensive printed versions of a lot of the PDFs that they have. I love those Hoxha books. Yeah, we're definitely going to come back to more of that. I really want to try to not... So, okay, here's what's coming up on the channel. I want to knock out some more of the basic Marxist-Leninist playlist, which there's only 3 things left. So like I mentioned, Anti-During Part 2, Capital Volume 1. That's going to take over a month, because we're going to have to go chapter by chapter and, of course, break it down. We've already done the first chapter, the commodity, it's called, and, broke that down with explanation. I really want people to be able to follow along with it. And there's there's over 25 chapters in Capital Volume 1. So each one is going to get a separate video, and it's going to take a while. Even if you get, so the current audiobook that I have linked in the playlist by somebody else, even reading it straight through without notes is 11 hours. So it's very long. Anyway, we're going to do Anti-During Part 2 by Engels, then Capital, then Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, which is, again, about a 4.5-5 hour book. Those are going to take a while to post. So in the meantime, I have a bunch of short texts from Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Luxemburg. There's a bunch of stuff on the subject of religion that I pulled out, and particularly from those authors, that are pretty quick and I can kind of just put up on the channel. A lot of the other stuff is longer. I don't want to commit to too many other things up front, but of course Capital is going to take up a lot of time, and you'll see a lot of chapters of Capital posted up on the channel. So that's kind of what's coming up. After that's done, that will sort of open the floodgates for a lot of other stuff, including further exploration of the Sino-Albanian split and criticisms of the Three Worlds Theory by Hoxha. And anyway, we're also doing the American Party of Labor, which is a Hoxhaist party playlist, and there's a number of fairly lengthy Enver Hoxha books as well. So excited to get into those, because he criticizes, as of the late 70s, early 80s, criticizes Eurocommunism, Titoism, Dengism, and the Three Worlds Theory that China was adopting at that time. Khrushchevism. I mean, he's got major works criticizing pretty much every other trend in the far left at that time. So I think that's valuable resources for people to get. Especially, I feel like the statements by Hoxha, as far as an anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist point of view, he was writing that stuff when the neoliberal turn was really happening, late 70s, early 80s, and is maybe one of the last really strong Marxist-Leninist voices out there criticizing this descent into neoliberalism. And anyway, I like reading that stuff for that reason. He is quite a writer, though, and the stuff is long, so yeah. I'm wanting to join the Green Party to see what kind of building can be done there, as there's no Marxist or socialist parties in my state. But my state's Green Party seems actually extinct, and I don't even know where to start with that. Yeah, that's possible. Some states are much more active than others. Contact who you can. Say, hi, I'm a leftist, interested in helping build the Green Party. Who can you put me in touch with? There's probably a contact number somewhere. Leave enough comments and things. Hopefully somebody gets back to you. But yeah, I mean, there's something going on in most states, but not all. So it depends. Just want to say thanks for the audiobooks on the YouTube. I don't have time to sit and read, so I listen at work. Much appreciated, comrade. Well, you're welcome. And, I get a lot of comments like that. It's good to know that more people are taking the time to get educated on this stuff. And, I'm one of them. I just happen to be the one on the reading end. But, yeah, that's what we're all doing here. Hoping that, over the course of 5 to 10 years, we get to a point where we actually have a really strong Marxist left. Laos can't farm due to the cluster bombs proper. Yeah, it's like I said, it's like a minefield. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm just shaking my head. I don't even know what to say. And the U.S. could make more restitution for that, or whatever. And it's just the USA, just this completely irresponsible war machine, just spreading death around the world. We just hit 4 of the hottest days ever recorded in a row. Excellent point. Yeah. Global warming, climate crisis, climate emergency. 4 of the hottest days ever recorded in a row, I think it was the 3rd through the 6th, were, if you take all the temperatures recorded around the world, it was, like half a week of the hottest days ever on record. That's not good news. We're also early in the summer. I mean, we're just like a couple of weeks into summer at this point. Summer, of course, starting around June 21st. So that's not a good sign. So far, it depends. There's been drought in certain places, and then it's been rainy in certain places. But, of course, those wildfires in Canada. Spain, I understand, is having massive heat waves and severe drought this year as well. And, that's a recipe for fire, because you get a lot of grass growing and then it all dries out. It's just literally kindling. So that's more than concerning. There's no talk of changing pace or direction on production whatsoever. No, and what's coming in the U.S. and in economies which are closely aligned with the U.S. is probably a massive recession in Q3, Q4, so July through December, and into 2024. So inflation has been... So the Federal Reserve, Central Bank of the U.S., has a target for inflation which is 2%. Basically, that's the rate of inflation that they want. However, it's well over 4% right now. And inflation has been in Europe, it's been all over the place. So inflation means raised prices. So prices are much, much higher. And also there's relatively high employment right now. So they're talking about the need to put I forget how many, but over 1 million people out of work. They want to raise the unemployment rate to basically, quote, cool off the economy. Hey, if your life gets destroyed in the process, no problem for them. But they want to raise the unemployment level, put more people out of work, and they're raising interest rates to make it more expensive to take out loans, to start businesses, to buy properties and things like that, in an effort to try to slow down the economy and make prices come down. But what's likely is a massive crash. And that's already starting, as we've discussed, in some areas. You can see it in the housing market, in consumer spending, and the Treasury bond curve going negative. There's a lot of indicators that we're at the top of of a long crash. And so the next few years looks really bad as far as people being put into unemployment and economic turmoil. This could be, actually, the indicators is what I was looking at so far. Seems like it's going to be bigger than 2008, and that isn't just hype. Like, the trends that already have started at this point in the process are already steeper and more advanced than they were at a comparable time prior to the 2008 crash. Because remember, 2008, that was just the point where the shit hit the fan, but the shit was heading towards the fan for a while prior to it actually, hitting the blades. We're in that point now where the shit has been catapulted, and it'll be hitting the fan probably, in the next year and a half. So, I don't even know. But like you said, there's no talk of doing anything fundamental to fix this, which obviously not. It's not in the interests of the capitalists to put a real fix on this. It would mean putting themselves out of power. But another 2008-like moment is coming up, and they're probably not going to be able to stop it. Like, the Federal Reserve is using all of its tricks, and so far they're not really working. They raised interest rates pretty significantly. It got the inflation to level off, but then it started rising again. So they're talking about more rate hikes and making debt really expensive, because that was part of how they got out of the 2009, 2010, 2011 thing, was like raise interest rates, raise like RAZE, like slash interest rates, down to like, 1%, things like that, and just basically hand out free money. Well, now they're doing the tightening, and they're doing quantitative easing for a while. Now they're doing the quantitative tightening, letting loans expire, not reissuing the money out there. And so it's looking like there's going to be a crash starting in these next 6 months to the end of the year. And then 24, 25 probably are going to be incredibly shitty years as well. But as far as like facing, multiple catastrophes, COVID is still in a lull. If you go to biobot.io, biobot.io/data, you can look at the wastewater curves. There was a recent bump in the wastewater levels of COVID, and then it leveled off again. So we're in a sustained lull, but that was also what happened in 2021. There's also some new variants of COVID that are spreading much faster, like the, I don't know why they named it this, but FU.1 variant. It's actually XBB.1.16.1.1, I think. But anyway, they nicknamed it FU1, spreading 50% faster than the dominant strain. So anyway, if you look at the wastewater chart, there was a recent bump, but then it's leveled off again at about 200 copies per milliliter of sewage, which when we're in a bad period, it's more like between 700 to 1,000. So 200 would be considered a lull. But we had a situation like this in 2021 as well, where the vaccines got rolled out in like March, April, May, June. We had a lull during that time. People were still masking then too. And then late July, it started taking off. We got that Delta wave that fall. So there was like a big bump in the COVID. And then, of course, we got Omicron, which caused a massive spike that winter. So just because we're in a lull now does not mean it's over. Again, look at the historical pattern. 2020 even, when there were a lot more controls, it was in a deeper lull than we are in now. 2021 as well, we had a lull, and we had a lull even after the mask mandates were lifted. And then last year, of course, we had massive spread. That has died back for the moment, but that doesn't mean that it's over. So, we haven't done a COVID update in a while. I've been giving myself a break from that. But the Northeast is still climbing. So the temporary bump in the wastewater by region, the Southeast had a bump, it leveled off. But the Northeast and Midwest are still climbing. So, we'll see what happens there. The Northeast, particularly New York City, has been leading the COVID trends in the U.S. for some time. But again, too soon to say. But yeah, so we're facing just multiple problems: financial collapse, climate emergency, COVID. There's no plan. I mean, like, we're on our own. We either come up with a solution, or the people in charge of things are not going to do it. Biden also nominating Elliot Abrams is not surprising. Yep. I mean, they're not even trying at this point. I mean, I don't know. Sea temperatures also been record-breaking. Yeah, I was just looking at a thing actually about the ice temperatures. Let me see if I can find that, because I think I just was retweeting it actually. The hell is my Twitter tab? Too many tabs open. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But basically, there was a chart showing the Arctic ice, and I was just looking at it, so let me see if I can scroll back and describe this. But it's a periodic chart, kind of looks like a sine wave that describes the annual temperature fluctuations in the ice. And there it is, Antarctic sea ice. So if you go to @ZLABE, Zach Labe, ZLABE on Twitter, let me see if I can put this up on the screen. I may not be able to. I don't feel like crashing my browser midstream, so we'll see what we can do here. Yeah, I'm going to pass just so that I don't crash the stream, but we're basically already significantly off course as far as where the ice temperatures normally are. Like I said, if we don't, as a mass movement, take power and come up with solutions, you can expect more of the same. There's no plan. They could just be lying about the dud rate on the cluster munitions that they're sending. Yeah, absolutely. There's no way to truly prove what the DoD says about the dud rate of the cluster bombs. No accountability as far as I can see. Absolutely. There's an article linked here about Elliot Abrams' role in the Iran-Contra. Let me take a look at that. That looks interesting. Yeah, Iran-Contra scandal, for those who don't know, this was the drugs for guns thing back during the Reagan years. 1984, I think that was. Oliver North, if you remember him. He then later got a show on Fox News. Okay. Biden to nominate Elliot Abrams, who lied over the Iran-Contra scandal, to a key panel. President's pick for Bipartisan Public Diplomacy Commission, 75, was convicted of unlawfully withholding information from Congress. Yeah, this guy's been around for a while. Joe Biden intends to nominate Elliot Abrams, a former Trump appointee on Venezuela and Iran, who was famously convicted for lying to Congress over the Iran-Contra affair, to the Bipartisan U.S. Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy. The announcement came wrapped in a list of 8 Republican picks for bipartisan boards and commissions, released in a White House statement on Monday. Quote, "It's definitely a way to reach out to neoconservatives," this was like the George W. Bush people, "and to throw them a bone," said the historian and journalist Eric Alterman, who has written about Abrams since the 1980s. It's a risky move on Biden's part. Abrams, 75, has held senior positions in 3 Republican administrations, rising to prominence during a controversial run as Assistant Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan. During Reagan's second term, a congressional investigation found that senior administration officials secretly facilitated the sale of arms to the Iranian government and used the money to support the Contras, a right-wing rebel group in Nicaragua, the Iran-Contra affair. Abrams, who was Assistant Secretary of Inter-American Affairs from 1985 to early 1989, later pleaded guilty to 2 charges of illegally withholding information from Congress, including his role in soliciting $10 million from Brunei during 2 October 1986 hearings, one before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and a second before the House Intelligence Committee. Biden, then a Delaware senator, was a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at the time. Abrams has drawn backlash for his support for the El Salvadoran government, whose army in 1981 massacred nearly 1,000 civilians in the village of El Mozote during its civil war against a coalition of Soviet-backed left-wing groups. In 1992, Human Rights Watch reports said that Abrams, as Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights, distorted information to discredit public accounts of genocide. Abrams also backed U.S. aid to the Guatemalan military dictator Efrain Rios Montt, who was later convicted for genocide and crimes against humanity during the Guatemalan Civil War. So, quote, "We only have really this example of legally defined genocide where the United States was complicit, and Elliot Abrams was the person who made that policy," said Alterman, referring to U.S. support for the Guatemalan government under Rios Montt. Congressional Republicans likely pushed Biden to tap Abrams to the commission, said Brett Bruen, the president of media company The Global Situation Room and a former U.S. diplomat. Quote, "It would be seen as interference should Biden not accede to those recommendations." A White House official said, quote, "It's standard for Republican leadership to put nominees forward for these boards and commissions, along with President Biden's own nominees. There are 7 seats on the diplomacy panel, 4 of which were vacant as of March, according to a State Department notice. It is housed within the office of the Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, a post that sat empty until Biden nominated Elizabeth Allen to lead the office in January. She began in June. Bruin said the vacancies on the commission underline a major missing piece in Biden's early pledge to restore America's image on the international stage. Yeah, there's a few more paragraphs here. Biden has been terrible. Absolutely terrible. I haven't noticed, it's not just my noticing it, but it's like the news that's just been coming out under him, it's not significantly different than what we're getting under Trump. And I really hope people take that to heart. People who are still clinging to the idea that somehow the Democratic Party is going to save you or is your friend or anything like that. Anyway, Nick Cull, a public diplomacy professor at the University of Southern California, said that Biden was not alone in neglecting key posts, citing a report by the former executive director of the commission, Matthew Armstrong, that found the undersecretary job has been vacant for nearly half the time since it was created in 1999. Most recently, Abrams was appointed by Trump to serve as a special envoy for Venezuela as the State Department ramped up its efforts to force out Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. Trump also appointed Abrams as special envoy to Iran in 2020. Abrams was reportedly in the running to be Trump's Deputy Secretary of State before being cut from the list of contenders over his criticism of Trump during the campaign trail. He also served in senior national security roles during George Bush's administration and is currently a senior fellow for Middle Eastern Studies at the Washington-based think tank Council on Foreign Relations. Once nominated, Biden's appointees must be confirmed by the Senate, but recent picks have languished. A floor vote to confirm Julie Su, the acting Secretary of Labor, to the official cabinet post has been delayed for months. So that story by Mary Yang from The Guardian. I don't even know. Things are falling apart. Like, the wheels are coming off. For me, watching how the COVID debacle just degenerated into the situation that we're in now with, just no regard for anything. I think this is it from now on. But it goes back. It's after Hurricane Katrina. They just sort of let a lot of that, Louisiana and that whole area just rot. And, some parts got gentrified and rebuilt by rich developers, but everybody else was just basically screwed. This is the thing. Disasters happen. Nobody cleans them up. And we're getting to a point where there's just multiple crises building up and building up and building up. They don't want to spend any money on it. They don't want to give people the idea that the government should do anything about any of it. And again, it's just piling up and piling up and piling up. Speaking of, Biden trending today on Twitter for, obviously it's not him personally tweeting it, but the @POTUS account, "On my watch, healthcare is a right, not a privilege in this country." Are you kidding me? Imagine being Joe Biden and posting, "Healthcare is a right, not a privilege in this country on my watch." No, it's a privilege. It's definitely a privilege. Like the average bronze plan cost is like $1,000 a month. That's basically just bankruptcy insurance. So, yeah. Readers added context that they thought people might want to know. Joe Biden has never publicly supported universal health care or Medicare for all, and has suggested that he would veto bills that implement such a system. So like, even if people passed it, he would strike it down. His stated policy goal is, quote, affordable health care achieved by expanding existing programs like the ACA and Medicare, except guess what? We had expansions under the pandemic. He let them expire. Was there a fight? No, there was not a fight. So millions of people lost health care when the pandemic emergency was declared over this year. And yeah, so that's Joe Biden. But he's going to go out there and say health care is a right. Like, they just don't give a fuck. They just don't give a fuck. So again, people clinging to this idea, the Democrats are there to help you in some way. No, if you want these things, you want universal health care, you're not going to get it from either the Democrats or Republicans, which then raises serious questions about where do we go from there. And this is why I'm teaching a channel about communism right now, because it will literally take something on that order to achieve any of this. And the sooner you get that through your head, the better. Because it's just illusion believing otherwise. Oh, okay. So that Red Spark thing, I subscribed to their site, and the confirmation email came from FLP, Foreign Languages Press. Yeah. As far as the climate crisis, somebody else points out the connection. The world's COVID response does not give me hope concerning how bad it will need to get before it's taken seriously. Absolutely. Yeah, we've discussed the thing about Hoxha calling everybody revisionist. I think the thing is, like, at that time, pretty much everybody was. And, you know, talking about 1977, 1978, 79, 80, you're literally like a decade out from the beginning of the end of it all. So I think he was not wrong. You know, and I mean, the thing that's said is, like, even in the beginning of the USSR and Soviet Russia, even before that, it was acknowledged that a socialist revolution within certain national borders could only sustain itself for so long without the revolution continuing to spread around the world, because otherwise the existing capitalism would, you know, send troops and launch wars and do sabotage and spying and, you know, would otherwise undermine and destroy it. The USSR managed to survive that for a very long time. But, you know, a country as small as Albania, I think, you know, not as well positioned to do that. And Albania wound up, you know, falling at the same time that, you know, or at least around the same time that everything else did as well. My favorite audiobook you posted has to be Activist Study, Araling Aktibista, because it's such a good, comprehensive, yet simple handbook. It is a good introductory piece, yeah. We'll be reading some more in that series as well. You know, there's like, anyway, there's a couple of other, you'll know them when you see them. You're my go-to playlist at work. Thanks for your work. Well, excellent. And please consider becoming a patron if you like it, because that really does help. So I think this is being asked rhetorically. What should a leader from a tiny country like Albania do? Swallow its criticism to other actually existing socialist countries for the sake of not being isolated? I mean, or you could say that the priority might be to get down a sort of last testament of what was actually happening. And I think that is somewhat what you find in Hoxha's work. Yeah, every year you get the hottest day ever. Next year will be hotter. Yeah. China's still at 2%. What does that mean? You can't sleep well without AC in the extreme heat. I mean, that is, of course, the default of what people have been doing. You know, AC was only invented not very long ago. Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's tough. I'm a New York City nurse. We've ended mask mandates for the most part in the hospital, so I'm really worried about this fall. We are far less prepared. Also, hi, rarely I catch a stream. Welcome. Yeah, the mask mandates in hospitals are gone. I mean, I follow a lot of COVID Twitter people. One thing the site is good for is getting news on that and perspectives. And yeah, the mask mandates are gone. People going to major medical centers, Mount Sinai, like all kinds of places, and like they were the only person masking. None of the doctors, none of the staff, nobody. Nobody was masking except for them. And yeah, with people not getting boosters and not wearing masks, this could be a devastating fall. It depends how things shake out with the mutations of COVID. But that FU1 strain, that is, to my understanding, circulating a fair amount in China. And, I mean, nowhere is really doing... But, like, even in China, there's a lot more masking than there is in the U.S. So, I mean, just culturally, people don't have this, like, massive aversion to masking that the U.S. has. Where, like, the U.S. is just so reactionary and it's so politicized. And people are like, I'm not living in fear. Okay, don't, but just wear a mask. Like, I mean, people, like, you wear a seatbelt in a car, just wear a fucking mask. Like, stop making a big deal out of it. My friend worked at the mobile morgues, and his wife is a nurse in New York City, but they're both just out there getting their COVID card punched. I'll never understand. Yeah. And reply to that, when Biden said it was over, people believed him and just shut their brain down to it. I think that the willingness to just, the craving for normal, it's just a form of denial is really what it is people want to believe everything's okay, even though they know that it isn't. They still have a desire to believe it. And it's really childish thinking. Adults, responsible adults, when there's a problem, take care of the problem. That's not happening. And it could literally be the death of us all. That Elliot Abrams article talking about the Guatemalan Civil War, and yet people in the U.S. keep wondering why people from Mexico to Argentina, let alone the rest of the imperialized world, try to seek refuge in the U.S., but it would rather that they just go back to the unsafe situations. Yeah, the U.S. causes chaos and disaster all over the world, and then doesn't want to be responsible for any of the fallout. Yeah, those are real people. Those are real people their family members are killed, they're maimed, they're traumatized, and they need to get out of the war zone that the U.S. helped to create, and the U.S. just acts like it's not their problem. This is why I call it, a death machine. By the way, thanks to the mods for keeping things moderate in the chat here today. Appreciate that. See, now the chat's going. Now that this is the S4A chat that I recognize. It was real sluggish there for the first hour. Anyway. So yeah, we're coming up on the 2-hour mark I said I would do. I'll do a little extra now that the chat's flowing, but yeah, that took a while. Anyway. The 2024 election is going to be a shit show. Yeah, I'll be trying to tune that out as much as humanly possible. I just don't know that anything relevant's going to come out of it at all. Yeah, somebody replied, I don't even want to think about the 2024 elections. Even Mexico is having their elections then, and I do not. It's going to be, yeah, bad. FEMA camps. I remember when I was much younger reading about the FEMA camps on, like, the super old, like, internet, like dial-up internet. And I was like, FEMA camps? This sounds, like, frightening. What are they talking about? Do they know something I don't know? Because it was a much lower information world then. Plus, I was a much lower information person. I was a lot younger. And you're like, they're talking about what's the government going to do? And, because that the U.S. government has done horrible stuff. And then, it clearly turned out that really wasn't a thing. But then Glenn Beck was, like, running with the FEMA camps thing anyway. But that really goes back to, like, the early 90s. The whole, like, FEMA camp thing. Maybe even earlier. Because there's people that, like, did research on the government's, like, what do they call them? Continuity of government things. And, like, other sort of police state measures to, like, keep the government operating in the event of an emergency and stuff like that. I think it came, like, I remember reading about stuff like that at that time. This was like all the libertarian stuff that you could find on the old internet, and you couldn't really find left-wing stuff, but you could find a lot of libertarian things. I hate the idea of a public option, quote unquote, which is really just a tool to stop the obvious implementation of universal health care. Well, as they started calling it public option, or Medicare for all who want it. Remember that line? Medicare for all who want it. And that doesn't actually work. You know why? Because there's something called an insurance death spiral. You need everyone in the same pool, high risk and low risk. If you just get all the high risk people, like if you just get all the people in the pool who are most likely to use resources without paying much in, then you get look it up, it's a known phenomenon, insurance death spiral. So you need people in the pool who aren't using the insurance. The easiest way to do that, put everyone in the pool. How do you do that? Well, you can either do this like cockamamie, like, the Obamacare mandate way. And there's a few different ways of doing that. There's employer mandates, there's individual mandates. That's what the ACA and Obamacare actually went with, was the individual mandate, where like literally every individual person is just mandated to buy it. So that was their solution for getting everyone in the same risk pool. And there's a much easier way. Just make it a right, and then also pool the funding. This is what most other places do, and it works really well. If Cuba, Mexico, etc. can have universal health care, why can't the U.S.? Of course it can. The capitalist class is really cheap and really stubborn and really reactionary. The Sino-Soviet split, there was a split between People's Republic of China and the USSR, is a very interesting time to study. There's a book by FLP that talks about this, Which East is Red, I believe it's called. Yeah, I haven't read that one yet. But they have a lot of documents on the Great Debate, as it's called. And, I have yet to deeply get into that, so I'm going to reserve judgments at that time. I mean, it's widely agreed that the USSR went into revisionism after Stalin. To the extent to which it was truly crippling is, I think, a separate question. But the USSR and China also had, pretty major conflicts around this time, like the 60s. And, including conflicts over the border. So, it was like a pretty intense fight between China and the USSR. But again, that's something I still have to do a deeper dive on. I haven't done it yet. Europe just installed quite a bit of renewable energy. That being said, the constant growth just moves the carbon dioxide ceiling up. Yeah, there's places in Europe that are far advanced in terms of using renewable, like solar and things like that. The U.S. could be leading on that and could be much further ahead than it is. Yeah, the USA could be much further along than it is, but oil companies basically run the United States. But you're right. If you just have to keep growing and growing and growing as capitalism does, that's going to be putting constant strain on your energy needs, so complicates things significantly. Despite having 30% renewable energy, we're still going to hit peak fossil fuel emissions mid-2030s. Yeah. Even with France having 70% of its energy coming from nuclear power, means it doesn't even have to talk about the issues with Russian oil, gas, etc. France's nuclear energy is like a ticking bomb. Nuclear power plants have to be decommissioned after 20 years. The average age of nuclear plants in France is above 38. Last year they had several failed rods in their power plants. It is amazing that they caught it early, because, you get a meltdown. France has problems now building new power plants because they haven't invested in a long time, and a lot of experts in the field are now retired. So this is the problem with the neoliberal era in general. They don't want to spend any money. And I think that this is in part out of a class-conscious understanding that if they keep developing technology and they keep developing conditions generally, it's going to lead to the proletariat reaching higher class consciousness, a more advanced position. In other words, they're, I think, trying to stave off the end of capitalism by just dragging their feet and trying to just coast as long as they can without renewing anything, developing anything, and letting things just break and fall into disrepair. Like, it's almost like they've taken capitalist development as far as it can go without seriously endangering their system. Continuing to do that, you can drive the fight for higher wages and all kinds of things. So, the U.S. has succeeded at keeping wages fairly low and so on. And so there's this whole the neoliberal slump where, and it's just not going to last forever. Like, I think we're reaching a lot of simultaneous breaking points now. Anyway, I can understand how people have this reaction to seeing people wearing a mask, because I'm at the point where just seeing people's unmasked face fills me with disgust. So, yeah, but it's of course, you're disgusted for a good reason. They're not. Yeah, as far as the U.S. having its grid situation as good as France's, just trending last week was the Texas power grid, which I feel like trends every summer now for just and in the winter too. Anytime that there's higher energy needs, the Texas power grid seems to be breaking down. Yeah, Alex Jones was still running with the FEMA camps in 2011, 2012, and possibly still is. Yeah, I mean, that was around the time that Glenn Beck was doing it too. That particular theory doesn't sound so crazy when you see the children in cages in other countries' detention centers that function like concentration camps. Yeah, but that's the thing. Then they cheer those things on. And so what you get out of this, and this is kind of an important point, is out of these mostly white Christian reactionaries, fascists, is a fear that what's being done to the oppressed groups that they basically give the thumbs up to oppressing are eventually going to be done to them. So it's this like projection and it's kind of like the thing about white genocide. When they're like, well, we genocided other people, and then it's at the back of their mind like, well, what if they got revenge and did it to us? That's kind of what a lot of this is. But I remember back in like 2006, there was a big thing with I don't know if it was Halliburton, one of those big contractors. The name is eluding me at the time, but it was like that they were building really big camps somewhere out in the West. They were building some like really big, like record large size camps for detaining migrants coming up from Mexico. And there was in the sort of right-wing conspiracy world, like all this stuff like, oh, it's for, housing like free speech prisoners like us. And it's like, no, dude, it's for migrants. Like, didn't you read it? And that's the thing is the libertarians not realizing that this system is what gives them all the ability to do all the crypto trading and all the other private property shit that they do, while constantly trying to portray themselves as the victim. But it is this big fear that it's like it's going to come home to roost with them someday, except it hasn't. And that's not even necessarily if there was justice, the way that it would be handled. But that's the way that they're constantly screeching, about the, the white genocide and all this other stuff. It's like fear that what they've been doing to other people is going to come back on them. And it's just watching this tortured neurosis of U.S., fascism. It's painful. I like it when Ben Shapiro says, what if hypothetically you and your friends buy insurance together to have an insurance plan? Yeah, pretty sure that's how like group insurance kind of started and so on. And then what if we actually made that really efficient and just put everyone in the same fucking thing, which would actually be the lowest cost of all? Hey. I mean, for people who don't know, the U.S. has the highest per capita cost by far for healthcare. Like the average cost, I think in the EU is like it's like between $1,000 and $2,000 per capita annually. In the US, it's like over 5,000. Like, it's so much more expensive here. It's so much more inefficient. But that's part of the reason, because those companies are pocketing that money and they want to keep pocketing it. So they're massive lobbyists. You know, the medical and insurance industries are huge political contributors. There is a good article that looks at the actual federal complaints and such of the detention or concentration camps on the border. Where is that article? UPS strike ahead. Yeah, I follow there's a YouTube channel. I want to say it's called Teamster Talk or something like that. Kind of a small channel, but there's some UPS guys. I just saw the headline. I didn't have time to watch the video. But yeah, they've been one of the more active unions. New podcast I found revolving around UPS Teamsters and the history of it. Interviews a bunch of Teamsters members, and it's really good. It's called The Upsurge. All right, good to know. The development of France's high-speed rail is also very interesting. This is the TGV. French people should be thankful to OPEC because the government was ready to tap out and prefer car transport over proper high-speed rail. Oh, until OPEC decided to, yeah, with the oil embargo and nuclear power, it made a lot of sense to run high-speed rail on electricity. Good point. I also hope all the port workers in Vancouver, Canada, LA, San Francisco, so up and down the West Coast, can all go on strike too. When was the last longshoreman strike? I feel like there wasn't there during like the Occupy years a big like longshoremen's union strike. It's fuzzy. I live in Texas and have finally acquired a few solar panels. I mean, talk about a good place to use it too. A lot of strong sunlight that I can use to power some light air conditioning in an emergency. Yeah, there's some pretty good, I mean, they'll run you, several $100s, but there are some good home solar hookups that you get some panels, you hook them into a battery that, has plugs in it, like you can plug regular appliances into the battery, and yeah, it charges pretty well. There's a fair amount going on there if you have the spare, a couple $1,000 to get a setup like that. The anti-mask brain rot is so severe that they were still yelling about it during all that heavy smoke a few weeks ago, in saying that you can literally see the contaminants in the air, and it's still somehow a liberal hoax to mask. Yeah, those people have lost their minds. They're like they've just gone off the deep end. People call you a sheep. Now being 1 out of 10,000 people wearing a mask says everything you need to know. Yeah, that's sort of the exact opposite. Like sheep is just going along with the flow. Yeah, good point. My hospital, a nonprofit, has literal billions in cash reserves and still complain that the pandemic was costing them too much to raise wages or hire more staff. That's the thing of the time that we're in. It's never enough for them. It's never enough. So they just, again, with the, they never want to spend any money. And we were just talking about this in the last stream. Like, rather than pay food service workers more, they will just literally close the lobby. And it's like, fuck the customers. You can't get any customer service. You can't go indoors. Go use the drive-through. And, you can't go in because we didn't want to pay a worker $22 an hour. They have billions falling out their ears, but no, they didn't want to pay $22. I mean, I had this experience at a job where it was like, I gave them my pay request, and they're like, oh, well, we can't do that. And they gave me like a slightly lower number, but it was, the number that they gave me was literally the minimum that I was willing to consider for that job, and I took it. And then I came to find out they were like, it was a pretty small company. They were like insanely rich, and I was just like, you couldn't give me like those extra few dollars an hour I wanted, but like meanwhile, anyway, just absolutely insane. All right, we have caught up with the chat for now, and we're just about in the 2-hour time frame that I was looking for. If anybody has any closing thoughts, happy to take them. The stream took longer to warm up than usual. Part of that was me, but part of it was I guess we're all just off to a slow start this morning. Anyway, what? Give basic aid to the peasants? What are you, a communist? That would hurt the economy. Yeah, this is the dialogue we're in, and I do think it's going to take probably nothing short of revolution to get out of the point we're stuck in now. What do we think of the Communist Party reactions to the riots in France? Covered it already. Not good. Not good is the short version, so covered it. All right, well, I guess we're going to leave it there. So thank you all for coming and for your contributions to the chat. And to everybody listening on YouTube after the fact, this is the tide you over content while we're prepping some of the longer things, such as during part 2. So yeah, everybody have a good time, and we will see you in the next video.